My name is Nate Kramer. I'm the director of Scandinavian Studies here at BYU. Let's see. We are looking forward to hearing from Professor Haataja in just a moment. Why this is kind of exciting for us tonight is that this is the beginning of a renewal of the Loftur Bjarnason lecture series. So we have been on hiatus for a few years because of COVID. So we had Marta Fjellestad last week. There's a wonderful exhibit over at the MUA, if you'd like to go check that out. Norwegian landscape photography and American landscape photography. And then we also have Dan here. So wonderful to start up the Bjarnason lecture series again. Loftur Bjarnason, just a little bit about him, was a former professor of literature at the Naval Postgraduate School in Monterey, and then was a visiting professor here at BYU. And it's his endowment that provides, for among other things, this lecture series.
Very nice introduction, and thank you, Nate, and thank you to everyone here at BYU for inviting me. I'm very honored to be here. It's my first time on campus, and I had a walk across campus today and around a lot of the buildings. It's been really fun to see what's going on here. The language activity here is just amazing to me. As a linguist, I get really excited by seeing this language taught here, and just chatting before the talk today with everyone. It's just so cool. It's like my geekometer is off the charts. You know, just speaking all these different languages, people that speak Icelandic, Norwegian, Finnish, everything. So today I'm going to talk about the Kvens, and how many people have never heard about, be honest, had never heard about the Kvens before we saw this? A lot of people. And the people that didn't raise their hand, you're in a very small minority, the people that have heard of the Kvens. Because if you go on the street and ask people, you know what a Kven is, they will have no clue what you're talking about. Even in Finland, people don't always know. In Norway, they're starting to know now. But there are a lot of people in Europe, certainly, that have never heard about the Kvens. So today I'd like to tell you all about the Kvens, because they're certainly people that deserve to be known, and their culture and their language has been, there's been a lot happening in the last 20 years, for example. So first of all, I have a concept that I want to introduce to you that's really, really important in understanding the Kvens, and that is this concept of the tre stammers möte, which in English is the meeting of the three tribes. And this is really crucial to understanding this area here. You can see on the top of, this is Finland. My map is in Finnish, sorry, but this is Finland, this is Sweden, this is Russia, and this is Northern Norway. And of course, this is, the border that Norway shares with Russia here, which has become really important, especially in the last month or so. But this area here is, there are two counties in Norway, Troms and Finnmark. So in Finnish, that's Tromsø and Finnmark. And these are the areas where the Kven live. And this concept, I want to start with this concept of the tre stammers möte, meeting the three tribes, because that's really crucial in understanding this area. So it's not just, this area is an area where the Finns and the Norwegians and the Sami have all met and sort of forged this sort of kind of culture, this hybrid culture, this kind of hybrid society in a way. And it's very different in this part of Norway, if you've ever been there, from Oslo. It's very far. If you drive from this area from Tromsø, which is where I was living, which is right over here, it's a 22-hour drive to Oslo. So it's a 2-hour flight. It's not at all close. So it's culturally very far away from Oslo. It's geographically very far away from southern Norway. As you know, Norway goes all the way down like this. And if we could walk down the streets in this area and take DNA tests of people, we would find that many of the people have 2, if not 3, of those groups that I just talked about. So there are many people walking around that don't even know that they're part Kven, part Sami, for example, that have completely Norwegian names, that are completely Norwegianized. This map, the areas that are in this lighter green here, these are the areas where the Kven live. And the Kven, so the Kven are people that, the definition of Kven basically is that the Kvens are people that live in northern Norway, this whole area, but whose ancestors came from northern Finland and northern Sweden over the last 300 years, anytime, really. And that sort of that period of migration has happened over in different areas at different time depths. It's happened the earliest over in this part and happened the most recently in this part, in the Far East, in, for example, Loftur. This map is in Finnish, so you can see the name of Loftur is Vesisaari. For example, these are the Finnish names of, or the Kven/Finnish names of the towns that are have different names in Norwegian. But these sort of this lighter green area are the areas that are the areas where the Kven live here and here and here and over here, these particular areas. So these, that is important to keep in mind, just this concept of the three tribes and also the concept of this geographical area.
That way it's not getting.
Okay, where do I need to stay?
You can go over there.
I knew this was, I knew I was gonna be a problem because I'm a big walker. I was realizing something was going on over there. So,
A little bit farther that way than you're off.
so stay over here. Okay, I'll just stay on this side. I'll stay on this side. No, that's fine. That's fine. I can do that. I can behave. I was wondering about that. Okay, I see where I am now on the camera. Okay, so this area, as I said, it's a period of it's an area. Northern Finland, if you've ever been to Northern Finland, is not the most hospitable environment. And especially if you want to make a living, and especially if you wanted to make a living back in the 16, 17, 1800s, if you've been up there, the growing season is very short. And there's not a lot that really grows. And a lot of the people, the Kvens, you know, they're the descendants of people who lived in Northern Finland and Northern Sweden. I always have to remember to say Northern Sweden also, because this whole part of Sweden here was also Finnish speaking. The Finnish actually, the language came all the way over to this side, all the way down to Haparanda, if you know where Haparanda is in Sweden there. But those areas were plagued by famine. And again, there's a lot of poverty, and this part of Norway was not very well settled. The Sami were there. I shouldn't say that, the Sami have always been there. So it was completely settled by the Sami in that respect, but it wasn't very well settled by Norwegians. I should say that. And the Finnish people moved there basically to work in fishing primarily and also in agriculture, because that's actually a milder climate, even though it's farther north. It's on the coastal areas are much milder. It's much milder in Tromsø than it is, for example, in Norway. Much, a lot of snow. Okay, so that is the. There was also population and pressure in Finland too, but there was a lot of migration north. Okay, so I say Kven, but really there are many names that we use both in English and Norwegian and in Kven to refer to this group. It's an extremely complicated thing. So at the top, this is the Kven flag here. You can see on the top, this is the new Kven flag, and the Norwegian flag on the bottom, of course. So in Kven, there are at least 3 different terms that the Kven use to talk about themselves, and that's Kväni, which is Kven in Kven, and then Kainulainen and Lantalainen. Kväni is really the most preferred term. Kainulainen and Lantalainen, they're sort of kind of falling out of popularity. But within Norwegian, what's really interesting is that there isn't agreement in Norwegian about what to call them. So a person is a Kven or Kvan in my Northern Norwegian dialect, and the adjective would be kansk. But then there are people in the eastern part of Finnmark, over there towards Russia, that don't like the term Kven or kansk. They prefer to be called either Norsk-Finsk or Finsk-Ættet, of Finnish descent. So even within the Kven community, they don't all agree on what to call themselves. And that's really important to remember, because we, basically people get to decide what they get to get, what their name is and what they're called. And that's the case in the case of the Kven. So if you come into contact with Kven people, you might get different answers. And the reason for that is because the migration into Eastern Denmark was very recent, even in the 1900s. So people feel very connected to Finland, and they have family members in Finland. Whereas people in Troms, for example, those connections are 200-300 years old. And they don't have those family connections to Finland anymore. But those are just some things to keep in mind. And I was just So Tina mentioned I was there in 2018 to 2020. I was there working for 2 years, but I was just back there 3 weeks ago, in fact, earlier in March. And it just so happened at the Kven Museum, there was an exhibit on the Kven. And I was so happy because I knew I was coming here and I thought, oh my gosh, I'm just gonna like get all this great new material for my talk. And I did. And there was this exhibition called Tuulessa, which means in the wind, even in Norwegian. And this is, I really like, I can tell you about the Kven, but the Kven can tell you in their own voices about their experience with being Kven. And I think this is a really interesting, this is just from 2021. This is the Kven theater, Kveni teatteri. Right there you can see. The thing about the Kven, Norwegian Finnish or Finnish culture, well, I feel it's a bloody eternal discussion here in the North, but that's how it is, loads of emotions are involved. So, and you'll see where all those emotions come from in a minute. And this is what it is in Kven. So people that know Finnish, can you understand it pretty well? Yeah, no problem really, right? So now you speak Kven. You can add Kven to your list of languages you know if you know Finnish. You can understand. It's like knowing Norwegian and Swedish anyway. So minä tunnen, että tämä krääni-asia, norjansuomalaisuus ja suomalaisuus pohjoisessa, se on yhä semmoinen ikuinen saakelin diskusuuni. So you can see the diskusuuni, that is not a Finnish word. Mutta semmoista se on, kun tunteet on siinä myötä. So this is what Ivar Eddari said last year. He was an actor in the Kveni teatteri. And here's just another quote, is that words are never neutral. So the word Kven has long been negatively charged, but in the last years it's taken on a more positive meaning. This is from the exhibit also. The official national minority name is Kvens/Norwegian Finns, in Norwegian Kvene and then Norsk-finsk, but Kven is used more and more. And it's been important for boosting Kven language and culture. And so in the exhibition, they decided to use the word Kven, but they had to make this statement because not everyone agrees with it. Anyway, so I just like to sort of point that out. So here, going back in time, as I mentioned, people moved up from Finland and Sweden into Northern Norway, and they were primarily working, a lot of them were working in fishing because it's a very rich area for fish, and fish is a great source of food, right? And people in Finland were starving. And suddenly you could move up to this other country, you could work in fish and have all this great food for your family, right? So this is just a little picture from Kamoiva, 1931, and it says Krikan Sammu. This is this Sammu Krikka, and then Kalarannassa is what it says, Oikineen. So if anyone has studied the comitative in Finnish, and you know the komitatiivi, this is a fantastic example for all the Finnish. I had to set the point because I'm such a teacher. I have to point out for the Finnish students, if you know the comitative, Tina has taught it this year, then that's the with his sons. It means Sammu Krikka at the fishing shore with his sons. But that gives you an idea of the kind of things that the Kven were engaged in living in Northern Norway, very different from that part of Northern Finland. There wasn't much fishing. So it was they kind of changed their professions really, how they made their living. Okay, so a lot of people moved in the 1800s from Northern Finland, especially because there was a big population boom in the 1800s. And so a lot of people moved into Northern Norway, but then the Norwegian government started to get involved because, as a lot of governments do, they start to worry about their citizens not being faithful to their government or suddenly, not speaking our language, for example. And so there was this whole government-sponsored movement of fornorsking, which is Norwegianization. And then there was this idea of den finske fare, that there was the Finnish threat of Finnish people with roots in Finland living in Northern Norway. And so what the Norwegian government did, and the local governments did, is to require a Norwegian surname for land ownership. So if you wanted to own land, you had to change your name. So there are a lot of Kven people living in Northern Norway that don't even know they're Kven. because their ancestor in the 1800s had to change their surname. And that certainly happened in the United States, right? But it didn't happen, it wasn't really the government asking you to do that, so that you could my family, it certainly didn't happen in Minnesota. And then Norwegian citizenship was required, and then knowledge of Norwegian was required for citizenship. So if you're going to be a citizen, then you have to learn Norwegian, you have to change your name. So this is how you erase the people, is you make them change their language and you make them change their name. So they're suddenly, have a Norwegian name like everyone else. And then, in fact, in 1936, which is not that long ago, it's less than 100 years ago, the 1936 school law forbade the use of Finnish as a helping language in schools. So now you had kids that were growing up speaking Finnish or Kven, and then went to school and just had to figure out Norwegian with no help at all. So as a result of this whole process, which, we think of Norway as such a benevolent country these days, and it is, but this is something that a lot of people tend to forget. It's the same kind of thing that happened in the Americas, right? Both in the United States and Canada with Native Americans. It's the same kind of process of getting people to be assimilated and, both linguistically and culturally. And it happened in Norway, not only with the Finns, but with the Sami, as we know very well. I'll talk about the Sami in a minute. So as a result of all of this, by the 1960s, many families had switched their home language to Norwegian. So what you get by this time is if you had a family with enough children over a long enough time span, you had the older kids speaking Finnish or Kven natively, and the youngest kids only speaking Norwegian. And that's how you kill the language, when the kids no longer speak it. So you would have the youngest siblings not understanding what their older siblings and parents were saying at home. So this had a really dramatic effect on the use of Kven and also just Kven identity. And here are a couple images from the exhibit, and you can see here what people said. When I was a little boy in primary school, bloody Kven and damn Lestedian were curse words. So if you know Lestedian, if you don't know what Lestedian is a branch of the Lutheran Church. It's within Finland, it's part of the Lutheran Church, but in the United States, Lestedian have their own churches, but a lot of the Kven were Lestedian because they came from that area of northern Finland. My family was originally Lestedian too on my dad's side. And then the other, said we were told it was only important to know English and German, as in terms of languages, but Kven was not important. Okay, so then we can compare what was going on in this exact same area, because it's the Trestammesmöte, with Sami and the Kven. And there are similarities and differences. So the similarities, of course, is that the Norwegianization process applied equally to Kvens and Sami. It didn't discriminate in that respect. You had to change your name. You had to learn Norwegian. If you wanted to own land, there were all these requirements. But what was really different is by this time when the Kvens were losing their language, the Sami were emerging politically. And that was really important at that time. The Sami were losing their language also. Many Sami lost their language, but post-1960s, and especially in the 1970s and 80s, if you've heard of the Alta conflict, there was a dam that was going to be built, and it ended up getting built, actually, and in Northern Norway and Alta. But the Sami really organized, and you can see here in the images here, this image is here, it says, we are hunger striking. And this one here, it says, we came first, and we are not moving. So it's the people that lived right by the dam. The dam was going to flood all this area where Sami had traditionally lived. But as a result of that, the Sami organized politically, and the Sami parliament was created, and they did it in enough time, in a way, for the Sami language to not be lost as much, really. And there was no similar thing that happened with the Kven. The Kven just silently faded away, really, at that time. So it's really interesting to look at the Sami and the Kven and look at those sort of, because they were, many people were both. There were people in these pictures that could be both. I have no idea really, they're definitely Sami, but they could also be Kven, because there are many people that are mixed. But the Kven language, one of the big questions is, we were talking about earlier today as lunch, is that, okay, people from Finland move into Norway, then when does that language that they spoke, that used to be called Finnish, when does it become a different language? Right? When do you decide and who decides? And there is no great answer to that. Of course, as we know, linguists know that it's a very difficult thing. So it's based on language, we call it a language now, which I'll mention why in a second, but it's based on Northern Finnish dialects. And there are words in it from Norwegian and Sami, and you remember that quote I read earlier with the diskusuni, which was definitely not from Finnish. So it's, to a Finnish person, they recognize it as, oh, Northern Finnish dialect, but there's this Norwegian word here, and then there's this word that you don't understand at all because it's from Sami. So there'll be words sprinkled here and there that you kind of don't understand. But Finnish people really don't have much of a problem understanding it. However, the Kvens have a more difficult time with Finnish. So it's sort of a one-way, it's a not sort of reciprocal intelligibility sort of situation. And one thing about that then is, if we look at, for example, Norwegian and Swedish, right? People that speak Norwegian can understand Swedish, basically, and Swedish can understand Norwegian, and Danish, well, sometimes, right? All of us that know some Danish, we have, well, sometimes. The Danes can usually understand, but it doesn't go the other way as well. But we call them separate languages because they have different orthographies and they're spoken in different countries. And using that same kind of logic, it's that same kind of logic that's been used for calling Kven a separate language. Number one, it's spoken in a different country. It's spoken 100% in Norway and nowhere else. Number two, it is associated with a particular culture. The culture of the Kven people who live in this particular geographic environment, who have their own traditions that may or may not be similar to Northern Finns. And then, because of that, an orthography has been developed. That if you understand Finnish and saw that quote before, you would notice that that doesn't exactly look like standard Finnish. It looks a little different, for sure. So in 1998, then the Kvens were recognized in Norway as a national minority. And I'll talk about national minorities in a second. That's an incredibly important thing from the governmental perspective, to be recognized as a national minority, because it means money, it means support, and it means recognition. And all those things are really important when you're trying to revitalize your language and your culture. And then in 2005, which is really not that long ago, right? To me, it's yesterday, Kven was recognized as a minority language in Norway, as a minority language. And over here, and I don't have it with me because it's over in the other room, but it's right over there. On the right is Kuosuvaran Takana, is the very first novel ever written in Kven that was published in 2004, 18 years ago, which is quite stunning. If you want to look at it, I have it, you can leaf through it. If you don't finish, leaf through it, you can say, do I understand this? So that's pretty incredible. So in terms of, if you want to master Kven literature, give yourself a couple of weeks and you can do it. If you want to get a master's degree in Kven literature, really. There isn't a lot written, but there's, well, I shouldn't say that, it's a pretty big book. And there are it's a 4-part series. So it's a little bit more Kven's grammatik. This is the grammar of Kven in the middle. That was written in the mid-2000s also. And you can see now, you see things like the Human Rights Declaration here. You can see Ignis Oikeus, people that know Finnish recognize that, but then it's Deklarasjoni, which is directly from Norwegian, right? So it's this kind of mixture of Finnish and Norwegian. And then, of course, the spelling is different in Finnish. You say maailman, not maailman. But you can see now, because of that, there are all kinds of things that are now written, official things that are written in Kven. But this is really not that long ago. In the 1960s was where all the loss occurred. So you have all of these decades and decades of nobody speaking Kven, and even, not long ago, people not wanting to be Kven because they're just word Norwegian, and then trying to revitalize that language and to reclaim your identity. So The Kvens are one of 5 different national minorities in Norway. It's the Kvens/Norwegian Finns. When I say Kvens, I always mean Kvens/Norwegian Finns. And then the Forest Finns or Skogfinner, which are way down in Norway, kind of near the Swedish border. And then the Jews, and then 2 different, the Roma, and then the Romani people/Tatars. There are 5 different groups, and these are all people that are national minorities who have their origins elsewhere, but live in Norway now. The Sami are not, this is a really important point in Norway. The Sami are not a national minority. They do not want to be considered a national minority. They're an indigenous people of Norway. So they didn't come from anywhere else. And that they really, when the whole national minority schema came up in Norway, who was going to be, when the decision was made, who was going to be a national minority, the Sami said, we are not a national minority. We are indigenous people. They didn't want to be fooled. So this is like a good trivia question. If you heard the trivia, what are the 5 national minorities in Norway? Seriously, it's really good. Norwegians are impressed when you know this. They're like, well, you know our 5 national minorities. But it's very important in terms of funding. And so because of that funding and because of that recognition, then the Kven language now is taught at UIT, UiT, the Arctic University of Norway, which is where I worked for 2 years. And we have an EA and an MA in Finnish and Kven. You can get a master's degree in Kven. It's the only place in the entire world that you can study it, well, at either level, EA or MA, at the university level. There are community classes that exist. But only in 2007 was the written language standardized. So that's, again, not very long ago. But because of that, working there, there is money that the university, that the government, I should say, gives for supporting Kven. So when I was working there, there were 4 of us doing Kven in Finnish. One person, I was Finnish language, then we had Finnish culture person, then we had Kven language, and then Kven culture person. 4 people, and my classes were 3 and 4 students. We were, Norwegian taxpayers aren't always happy to hear this. Norway have to pay very high taxes. But that's what becoming a national minority gets you, is taxpayer dollars, and that support you having a program like that. Because if not in Tromsø, then where? Then nowhere. But it's a pretty big deal, and it was really exciting for me to be part of it while I was there. And a little bit more about outside the university, because of course not everyone goes to the university. Finnish and Kven can be taken as a subject in some schools in Tromsø and Denmark, those 2 counties in the north. There are around 500 students that take both, and only about 50 of them take Kven. And when I was working there, one of the years, we had this round-robin job of being called our fog group, which is our little group of people in our little area, which is kind of Finnish at the university. And one year I was the contact person, so I got all the emails about anything related to Kven. And we kept getting these emails like, we have students in this remote village that want to study Kven, but we don't have a teacher. Can you find a teacher? And we were like, no, we can't find a teacher for you. One teacher they found was from Alaska. They found a guy who had lived in Northern Norway, American, but lived in Northern Norway, that learned Kven, and they recruited him from Alaska to go back to Norway to teach Kven. Because so many of the Kven don't even speak their own language and aren't qualified to teach it. So there's a big shortage. There's a lot of interest, but there are not a lot of qualified people that can teach Kven. And if you're going to revitalize the language, you need people that know the language so well that they can teach it, right? But the government has provided a lot of funding for teachers where we get training in Kven. When I was there, it started a brand new teacher training program to train teachers specifically in Kven, so that those teachers could go into the primary and secondary schools and teach Kven. And I'm not sure, I haven't been there in 20 years, and I haven't really asked too much about that program, but I'm not sure how it's going. But there was definitely some initial interest, but those things take a while for them to happen. You need to train the people, and then they have to, start working in the field. So not only is this about language, and not only is it about, learning it in a classroom area, but it's also about culture. And culture is, of course, very important. So there are different cultural organizations that support language and culture. So one of them is the Rojantveidiliitto, or the Norske Kveners Forbund. Then there's also Kainuu Instituutti, or Kvensk Institute. So here you see the word Kainuu, and it has nothing to do with Kainuu in Finland, if you know about Kainuu. It has nothing to do with that. So the people that have lived in Kainuu in Finland, I know a couple of guys I was talking to back here, it's weird, it's not, it's a different use of Kainuu. And then NRK, which is the Finnish national Norwegian company, they have now Kvensk pages. And you can read news in Kven. So you can see there, kuinka se menee hyvästi, seppä poika, etc. Kvensk ääni. And you can see here, there's even a Kvensk newspaper, Rojankaiko. And you can see here that some of it's in Norwegian, some of it's in Kven. It's sort of mixed the way it goes. And then there's a little bit of also radio that we have nowadays going on. And so not only do we have some media happening in Kven, but there's also theater. So there is now, since 2019, there has been this play produced just maybe an hour's drive to the east of Tromsø, which is called Pyläteri. And these are pictures from when I was there in 2015 or 19. It was actually 19 when I was there. It started in 18, I think, was the first year. But these are pictures from the production. It was outside, and they poured us coffee from this big pots in the old Finnish style. And there was the production over there. You can see it was outside. It was raining and cold, but nobody cared because it was all about Kven culture. And you know, when you might wonder, oh, so was this production all in Kven? No, it was mostly in Norwegian because not many people speak Kven. But it was all about Kven culture, and there was a lot of music in Kven. A lot of the songs were in Kven, and there were Kven words and phrases that were sort of interlaced throughout the whole production. And this has been going on for now ever since that year, and that has been a big thing to try to get this going. This is just a once-a-year thing in the fall, but now they're working on getting their own actual theater, sort of permanent theater, and there is a lot of interest in that in the community. So here's an example. This is the Tromsø the city hall and the Kven flag. The flag is important now to have a flag that represents your culture, and you can see now in Tromsø on Kven Day, which was the 13th or the 16th of March, then they raised the Kven flag in front of the city hall. And this picture is mine. This one is mine. I took this just a couple of weeks ago. This was at the church. People were going into the church in the Domkyrka there, and you can see the Kven flag. I couldn't get the wind to make it. That's why it looks that way. I took many pictures and finally got a little ripple. So you can see the actual flag, but they put the flag outside the church for Kven Week, which was just a couple of weeks ago. And then one thing, if you go to Northern Norway, you will definitely notice signage that is different if you haven't been there for a while. Nowadays, there are changing signs all over Northern Norway, and they're making them trilingual. So they have the Norwegian on the top typically, and then they have, I should say they always have the Norwegian on the top. Not typically, the Norwegian is always on the top. Then underneath that is either Sami or Kven, depending on the municipality. So you can see this Vadsø, Chahtisuolu, Vesisari. That's the same place in 3 different languages. And Alta looks pretty similar there, and Öshavre, Usuyoki, Usuyoka. This has been there's a whole office whose job is to rename places, is to discover what the original Kven name was. Because there's someone out there, there's some older person that knows, yeah, we call this place this. And then they make sure they get the spelling right, and then they put the sign up. But what's interesting is this is not uncontroversial. They have found some of the signs, none of them in my pictures, but they have found some of the signs with bullet holes through them. You know why? Because the local people don't want the Kven names on the signs. Because, do you know why? Because we're not Kven, we're Norwegian. Even though they're Kven. So it's super interesting, this whole aspect of the Kvens themselves sort of denying their own heritage by not wanting to be Kven, and the bullet holes in the signs and people will tear them down. This is changing now. This is, people are coming to accept it because there's so many now, and they just know it's gonna be that way. But for example, this is from 2020, this little thing here, if you understand Norwegian, then now there's a new name in both, in Kven and Sami for the airport in Tromsø. So now the airport has a name in all three languages. So anytime this happens, it's kind of a new piece of news, and they say, yes, this place is named this. So this is, if you're driving around in Northern Norway, you'll see this. It's pretty cool to see the, again, names are important. First, people's names are important, right? Place names are important because that is what the local people call that, you know, living there. And then finishing up, well, a couple things. Just one thing is that related to this last point, these are two things from the exhibit here. This woman said, I called my father and said, I found a new family line. Great, tell me about it, he said. And I told him, it's one Peter Peterson, Arby, a Kven. He went silent a long time. Then suddenly he said, so what's the weather like in Oslo? In other words, we're not Kven. The father doesn't want to Kven. And over here, just a young person saying, Mom, why didn't you refer to me that I also want to go to Kven? It's just again, the language loss, the loss of the language and the, you know, the belonging. You can see in a lot of these, you know, all of these, they're not all happy quotes, right? But they're really what the Kven people feel right now. And then this is the last thing I think I'll pretty much talk about is that there has been continued controversy as to whether Kven is a language or not. So in January 2020, just 2 years ago, there was an article published in Norwegianization, which is the Northern Lights, which is the Tromsø newspaper, by a woman named Sanna Saroma, who is a Finnish woman from Finland living in Norway. Not a Kven, a Finnish person living in Norway. And she wrote this article called Dansk fortsatt ikke et språk, which means Kven is still not a language. And her whole article was about Kven is not a language, it's a dialect of Finnish. Why do you think you have your own language? Why do you think you have your own orthography? It's just Finnish. They should just be teaching Finnish in the schools. Well, again, here's an outsider telling the Kven what their language should look like and what it should be called. This caused a huge series of articles to follow it. One of them, and this is another one that she wrote, she said, Tänk om skolan hade undervisat i kebabnorsk. Think if school had been taught in kebabnorsk. And kebabnorsk is the Norwegian that's the people of Middle Eastern origin that live in Oslo. So it's a kind of derogatory term. Kebabnorsk. So she's a very controversial figure in Norway. Read the Norwegian press. This is my group here, Faggruppa in Kvens. We wrote this article. This is the article that we wrote. And my name is at the bottom of it, as the four of us. Så utenforstående bør ikke diktere språklige valg for en etnisk minoritet. So someone from the outside should not dictate language choices for an ethnic minority. And she was quite the outlier. But there were Kvens that agreed with her. So that's the interesting thing about that point. People are like, yeah, we should just be learning Finnish. So this is, I like to point out all this stuff because it's such a complicated issue that's going on with the Kvens. It's still kind of bubbling and it's still kind of, it hasn't settled down yet. You know, Norwegian and Swedish, we've decided that, right? But not Kvens. Okay, so what's the prognosis? Well, in terms of the numbers of Kvens, we don't really know because so many people have changed their names and their identity. We don't know, but the rough estimate is there are about 10,000 to 15,000 people in Northern Norway that are Kvens. But about the speakers, it's very difficult to tell. Maybe 2,000 to 8,000. I think it's probably more like 2,000. And most of them are elderly, quite elderly. So if you remember the 1960s is when people stopped speaking to their children. Most of those people are going to be 60, 70, 80, 90 really by this point. However, what they've done in Northern Norway is something that has an idea that started in New Zealand, the idea of language nests, if you've heard about these, where you have elders teaching children from a very early age. And there are 3 daycare centers in Porsanger in Northern Norway where they are teaching Kven to the really small kids. So language revitalization, as we know, is dependent on the youth. And that's really the only way you're going to get it back. Because adults, we know that with Native American languages, is that adults often learn it only to a certain level, except all of you guys, which you're all language whizzes, but in this room. But very few adults otherwise do, right? Very few learn it to the level where they can really transmit it. So it's really, the way that you keep a language going is through the youth. So there's been a lot of work now with the youth here, and then that's a children's book, for example, that is been written in Kven. So there's been not just novels, but children's books now written in Kven. Okay, that's it. Thank you for your attention.
All right, for question and answer. So please, if you have questions, show me your hands.
Way in the back.
Are there any monolingual Kven speakers? Are there any monolingual?
Yeah, I heard. I hate to answer when I don't know 100%, but I would pretty much say no. Yeah. Are there any monolingual Kven speakers? No. Everybody speaks Norwegian too. Yeah. No, there's been so much Norwegianization, and if there would be any, they would be in East Denmark over there. And there's one particular village, which is maybe the place that you would have them, but everyone is, Norwegian is just the language of Norway. It's such a dominant language in Norway. If you've been to Norway, that it's Norwegian. So they really aren't.
In the one slide you showed of the play, I noticed they were using Veli for Naudela.
Yeah.
And that reminded me of the development of Finnish in the United States. So obviously they would adopt Norwegian words using Kven.
Mhm.
Do they also repurpose Finnish words as technology developed and that sort of thing?
Yeah, not so much. They use more Norwegian for that, for the technology, right? So telephony, for example, napuhelin, things like that.
Ilmalaiva
Ilmalaiva, yeah.
instead of Lenmalaiva.
Yeah. So what happened so all of the things that happened if you know anything about the history of the Finnish language, there were a lot of, in the 1800s, Finnish had more Swedish words than it has now. And they got rid of a lot of words, and then they replaced them with native Finnish words. They came up with their own words, like the Finnish word for telephone is puhelin, not telefoni, which you might expect. We have televisio in Finnish, but there's puhelin. Tietokone is computer, for example. Lentokone is airplane. But the whole and all of that happened in the late 1800s and early 1900s in Finland didn't happen with the Kven. Their language stayed there, and then all those concepts emerged, and then Norwegian just really basically took over all that. So it's really more of that. There hasn't been, in Finland it was a very deliberate attempt. People sat down at the table and said, what are we going to call this? In the Kven communities they didn't have people like that. People are like, what are we going to call this new technology? What do they say in Norwegian? That's not right. It's really practical. So
Just add an I.
just add an I. Exactly. Just add an I and you make it Finnish or Kven. Absolutely. That's right. That's it. Yeah. Good questions?
Do the Kven have any unique musical forms like how the Sami have the yoik?
Yeah, not really. That I know of. No, it's not too different from just the regular Finnish tradition. That's a really good question. You might have thought that, that something had emerged during that time. But no, there is no particular instrument, for example, or any particular sort of singing tradition that is really that different. If you're familiar with Northern Finland, you would just recognize a lot of things in their musical tradition too. Yeah, good question.
And do they have national costumes? Is there clothing that they've retained from their roots?
Yeah, there is. So there is some, and there's now a new trend. Because if you know about the Norwegian national costume, it's everything in Norway, right? If you're going to be there on May 17th, you got to be looking fine in Norway. And so there now is a kind of national costume that's used. Yeah, exactly. That's used in,
That's interesting.
in Norway to show you that you are Kven, right? Yeah, but it's something that's been sort of created. It's not so much the historical. Yeah,
Has there been any Kven or Kven? Sorry.
it's hard to say, isn't it?
Yeah.
Kven, it is.
I
We
remember
don't have no words with Kven, except for Kvetch.
Yeah, but has there ever been any like more east, like on the like near Petsamo, or is it just like that would have been later taken over by Russia? And is there any like remnants over there? I assume Russia would
On
have
the Russian side,
like taken it all out, but
not that I know of, because I just, as far as I know, everyone that was Finnish speaking in Petsamo was evacuated, you know. But that's a really interesting question. I don't really think there are any remnants of that on the Russian side. It was basically all on the Norwegian side. Yeah, yeah, that's a really good question.
Yeah, so you mentioned language nest. Are there any other revitalization efforts, like for adults specifically, like adults wanting to learn the language?
There are. So the Tromsø Museum, all those images from the, you know, that I took just a couple weeks ago from the museum, they have a Språk cafe, where they have a language cafe where you can come occasionally. And I've been to that, but it's not really teaching you
Yeah.
the language. It's already for people that know it. There is some, I hate to criticize, but I feel like a lot of the movement in Norway I feel like they need more language work. I feel like they need more language classes. I feel like they need more people to really buckle down and learn the language. Because by learning the language, right, the culture comes with it. Right. And I think, you know, if I would say anything to the Kven people, I would say, you know, you need more classes. You need to really learn this language and learn it well. Because there aren't as many classes as you might think. But there are some. There's this language cafe. There's also there's some community classes in certain places. But in terms of, I didn't know of any other, except for that language cafe, I didn't know of any language classes you could take outside the university. And the year I was there, they had one student. That's in the beginning class, one. So.
Is there a Kven culture center? Like
There are many cultural centers. So there's much cultural activity, but there is not a ton of language activity. I mean, as a linguist, I'm, of course, into language and people learning language. And as a language teacher, I'm into, you know, how you access the culture is by learning. That's the way to do it. But you know, I'm not going to tell them to do it. But yeah, but that's something that I noticed that's different, you know, compared to other movements in other places in the world I've seen, is I think there are fewer classes for adults specifically.
What do you find are the main incentives for them to learn a language? If they already know Norwegian or Finnish, and if so, immerse in that culture, is it only connecting with their roots that would be that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. So there's not, you know, we were talking about Kven literature. There isn't a huge amount of literature you have access to. You could do learning Kven, you get access to Finnish, right? But I think it's just that connection to your roots. One thing that's really interesting about the Kven is that as a Finnish American, as someone who grew up, my father's native language is Finnish, and my grandparents spoke Finnish, but I did not grow up speaking Finnish. So my father was the dead end in terms of the language transmission in my family. So there were so many parallels between my life and the life of Kven people. It's just Americans can completely relate to the Kven because the Kven feel the sense of loss and the sense of we're living in this, in a way we're living in this other country and our names have been changed and our language was lost and we're trying to reclaim our roots. And that's exactly how the Kven understand Americans' interest in genealogy, whereas Finns don't always understand Americans' interest in their roots in Finland. They don't, or in other countries. They don't always understand it. They kind of get it 100%. It's a parallel thing. Super interesting. It's really interesting. Yeah. So I felt a lot of affinity for their friends. I'm like, oh yeah, she's like, the language was lost.
Where do you draw the line between Kven and Finn who has moved to Norway? Because my dad moved to Norway, is Finnish. He moved there in late 90s.
Yeah. Well, where in Norway?
Oh, down by the west coast.
That's a really good question. So when do you draw the line? Yeah.
Or where, if that's
Well,
the question.
the Kven basically, geographically live only in Turks and Finland. But of course, they can move wherever, right? So they're Kven, just like Sami living in Minnesota, of course, right? So, yeah. I don't know, what does your dad identify as? Finnish?
Finnish, yeah.
Living in Norway. That's what I would imagine. Yeah. The Kven is this, there are people that I've talked to personally that told me that they didn't used to like the word Kven, but now they've embraced it. So there has been this change in sort of this acceptance of the word Kven and sort of, taking it on, even though they didn't like it previously. But it's a really interesting question. Yeah, I guess I don't know. I mean, I think, again, your dad could call himself whatever he wants. It's his choice. He could call himself Kven if he wanted to identify with that community. But,
We'll take one more question. We've got to let,
So, what's next for you in your Kven studies? Are they letting you teach something at the Minneapolis campus?
yeah, oh gosh, that's a great question. Yeah, I don't know. I would really like to do so. When I was there, I was, like I said, I was teaching Finnish. So I was absorbing everything I could Kven-wise around me, but I had my job. We all have our jobs to do. And the same thing at the University of Minnesota, I have my job. I actually have my feet in two departments, in linguistics and our department, which is German, Nordic, Slavic, and Dutch, teaching Finnish. So I don't have a lot of opportunity to branch out, but I would love to. It's a great question because there is this desire to help somehow and do something with but I'm not sure. Yeah. Great ending question.
thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.